Hello. I decided that I would do a little fireside chat for you on chapter 29 because I was looking at it and holy Hannah, it's a thick chapter. So, this is Boo, and she's probably going to skedaddle in like a second. She doesn't like to be here. But I'm going to talk at you about chapter 29. It might be in two parts, so double check the Edmodo posting, okay? Alright, so chapter 29, War Abroad, War at Home. She doesn't like war. Do you like war, Boo? No. Okay. We're talking about Vietnam, and the chapter extends into much more than just Vietnam, with all the other social issues that are happening in the country at the time. God, I'm like a hairball now. Nice, Boo. Vietnam, America's longest war, is how it starts out. You have to remember that the idea that we're functioning under is the idea of containment. And ultimately what's going to happen with the Vietnam War, yeah, there's actually a fire in the background. I can see it on my screen. That's funny. Is we weren't able to contain communism. It spread, and we weren't able to get a grip on it. But we spent a long time in war trying to do just that and be able to kind of get rid of the idea of communism in Vietnam and be able to contain it there. Kennedy had started the pathway to moving people into Vietnam, and Johnson really put that forward. But the way that he started the war is really controversial still to this day, because he felt that he needed to have something. Well, obviously, you need to have something that's going to allow Congress to say, yeah, go ahead and declare war. And so he ended up doing that because a couple of our ships were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. And so he drafted the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, but it was done 6 weeks before the accident or the incident actually occurred. So there was a little bit of sketchiness going on. And with Vietnam, it's the first time that our country openly questions what's happening in the government. And that will play itself out in other facets of United States life, mostly social life type things and social issues in the United States. So Johnson brought more and more soldiers into Vietnam after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Yeah. Time had passed for keeping our guns over the mantle and our shells in the cupboard. So we have to do something. So he introduced a lot of ground troops for offensive operations. Operation Rolling Thunder is what he called it. And he was trying to tell the American people that things were under control. And he had a grip on it, and don't worry about it. It's going to be fine, and we're winning the war in Vietnam. And the images that people were getting from television, because this is the first time that TV had really kind of broadcast what was happening, didn't match up with what he was telling the people. So there was this thing that they called the credibility gap, the idea that network television is reporting one thing and the president is saying something very different, and they don't seem to mesh up. The Viet Cong and the Viet Minh are two groups you're going to need to know the difference between and where each group operated and functioned. Let's see. Television, human suffering. I'm just looking at here. There's a lot of people that are starting to really kind of talk out loud about their and voice their opposition to the war. People from all over the country really wanted to end our involvement in Vietnam. And where this started on a social level in the United States was at Berkeley. We talked a little bit about this with the flashcards, but there was a free speech movement that happened at the University of California at Berkeley. Civil rights activists kind of congregated on the campus, and they were it was tried to prevent them from meeting, but they didn't, and it's kind of where the counterculture started. So the counterculture is the idea that people had different alternatives to the norm, to mainstream values that were there, and they were doing anything that was against that norm that had been set. 1967 was the Summer of Love. People wanted to do things that were exactly the opposite of what was happening in Vietnam, so make love, not war, those types of things. Everyone went to San Francisco with flowers in their hair. They got into drugs here, mood-altering drugs, and had a lot of sexual escapades. Music singers, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, were very popular in promoting this kind of anti-establishment ideals. And then Woodstock happened as well. Following Operation Rolling Thunder, various universities throughout the country started to protest the war and have, not sit-ins, what do they call them, teach-ins, students protesting, not going to class, gathering on the, in the commons area, those types of things. So people were still, really active in what was happening in the war and trying to get us to pull out of Vietnam. The average World War II soldier was 26. The average age of those who fought in Vietnam was 19. And disproportionately, there were more African American soldiers than there were white soldiers. So we still were at a disproportionate balance of equity in the military as well as in society. During the war, soldiers that were in Vietnam started to kind of protest themselves and put peace signs on their helmet. African American soldiers had black power symbols and things like that. So people that were even over in Vietnam were resisting the situation that they had been put in. Then we go back to the United States. While Johnson's working on this whole thing that's happening in Vietnam, he's also trying to argue domestic issues, and he's trying to not lose the focus on domestic issues by what's happening overseas in his foreign policy. So that's part of the reason that he's kind of glossing over what's actually happening in Vietnam. It was intentional deceit that he was doing with the American people about what was happening in Vietnam, trying to protect his great society and what he was trying to do in the United States. So we have the War on Poverty that comes together, lots of different organizations that come out of it. It was a huge program to be taken on. It was the most aggressive program since the New Deal, and it had mixed results. So, I mean, you can't. Some areas it worked and some areas it didn't. Kind of like most legislation that's passed now. Urban uprisings. Oh, Watts riots. There we go. There was the other. Flashcard that we had. But people were starting to retaliate and have uprisings in different areas of the country, particularly ones that were involved in heavy unemployment rates, worsening conditions. Things were just kind of generally sucky overall. If you look at the map here, there's urban uprisings in all of the different red-starred cities, one of which was Minneapolis, happening in the late 1960s, so 67, 68. In 1968, what a tumultuous year for us. The summer of 67 is when all of these urban uprisings were happening, and it led into a severe state of frustration in 68. And the most destructive actions in Vietnam happened in 1968, so it's kind of a year that we know. The Tet Offensive, which we talked a little bit about with the flashcards, the North Vietnamese broke a truce for the Vietnamese New Year and attacked South Vietnam, and ultimately the United States and the South Vietnamese ended up winning it, but it threw us off. And it also reflected to the people that what we were doing in Vietnam was not actually as successful as, again, the president was claiming it was. So the credibility gap is still in a place of fluctuation there, because they're not telling the truth to the people in the United States, and the people in the United States are starting to figure that out. Walter Cronkite, who was a very famous journalist, went to Vietnam and basically said that the war there was unwinnable, and then Johnson responded saying, or someone said to Johnson, "Mr. President, if you've lost Walter Cronkite, you've lost the American people." If our newscasters don't even believe, oh great, yep, it's 6 o'clock, ding dong, okay. Excuse me, I almost just choked on my own spit. On page 1066, there's a good map there that explores what's happening in Vietnam, and you don't need to know like major battles or anything, but what I do want you to notice is the way that Vietnam kind of wraps around Laos and Cambodia. And the telephone. This is awesome. I'm just going to pause it for a second. Hang on. Okay, the map on page 1066 talks about what's happening in Vietnam. And what I want you to notice, too, is that, you know, they were divided on the 17th parallel. That's that green line there. And so the South Vietnam was occupied by UN soldiers and our soldiers, and the North Vietnam was communist. And what was happening, and part of the reason that we had this distrust that was building in the government is because we made bold statements as the government saying that we were not bombing Laos and Cambodia, we don't need to worry, you know, have no fear, we're not going into other countries, this is solely a Vietnamese thing. And it came out later that many of our soldiers had actually died in Cambodia and Laos because we were kind of skirting off to, you know, the left there, or to the west there, to try and kind of get out of the way of the Viet Cong. And the Viet Cong were also traveling through those areas too, so we were trying to bomb them and stop them from being able to get supplies from the north to the south. So we were bombing Laos and Cambodia, and we boldly lied to the people of the United States, saying we weren't involved in Cambodia, you don't have to worry about it, when in fact we actually were bombing what was happening there. So, all of this is going on. 1968, we're still looking at here. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. He goes to Memphis, Tennessee to help some sanitation workers with a strike, and he ends up getting killed by James Earl Ray, and then riots broke out as a result of it in over 100 cities. So, we have a tense situation in Vietnam. We have tension rising in the United States because of the assassination of Martin Luther King. We have horrible working conditions. We have unemployment. It's skyrocketing. So just things are really kind of crappy for the United States at this time. Then we have the Democratic campaign that's going on. And we have Hubert Humphrey, Woo, Minnesota, who was kind of vying with Robert Kennedy for the nomination, the Democratic presidential nomination. Earlier, Johnson had come out and said, I'm not seeking a second term. I will not ask the people. I won't accept a second nomination, so I'm done. And so then it was like a scramble to kind of find people to be able to fill in. And so Hubert Humphrey and Robert F. Kennedy were kind of the forefront of the Democratic nomination. And on the night of the California primaries, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in California by Ciron. So then it left Hubert Humphrey, and he had already kind of made his statement as being just kind of he just didn't have much oomph. He was a good talker and had, I think, you know, good ideas, but I don't think he was, you know, like the energy and the fire that they were looking for to kind of win this out. So he ran against Richard Nixon and ultimately ended up losing. The Democratic Convention in Chicago, there were a lot of protesters that were happening outside, and it ended up being I don't know if you really could call it this, but throughout history it's called a police riot. Richard Daley was the mayor of Chicago, and was kind of a political boss, and had ordered that the protesters go home, and then kind of, you know, sick the police on them, and it was bad. Really bad.